Back in his freshman year, he was the poorest guy in the entire class. There was a girl in class named Chloe. She was the kind of rich that made people joke her family owned mines. During a pointless game of truth or dare, she lost. The penalty was $90,000. Everyone thought she would back out, but she transferred the money on the spot. Her note had just 4 words: "A bet is a bet." From that day on, his life completely changed. He started ordering the seafood rice bowls in the cafeteria, the ones he never used to dare touch. At the milk tea shop downstairs from the dorm, he changed too. He went from a part-time student worker to a regular customer. He could finally afford the full set of exam prep books by the library too. She never once asked how much of that money he had spent. And he never explained it either. By the day he graduated 4 years later, her money had lasted exactly long enough for him to get his diploma and his job offer. There were only 82 cents left in his account. 4 more years passed, and he saw a figure curled up beneath an overpass, dirty face, torn clothes. But the moment he saw those eyes, he recognized her instantly. It was Chloe. He heard her family had gone bankrupt. Her parents had run off, leaving her alone to shoulder every last debt. So he crouched down and held out his hand. "Come with me?" When the phone rang, he was on the 3rd floor of the cafeteria. He was shoveling down plain rice with a free bowl of soup. His screen lit up. The caller ID said Jason. He answered the call. A few grains of rice were still stuck to his fingers. Jason's voice came through immediately. "Chris, where are you?" Chris replied in a low voice, "Cafeteria." Jason jumped right in, speaking even faster now. "Hurry up, Splendor KTV, room 302, it's Chloe's birthday." The moment he heard that name, Chris frowned. Chloe? The richest girl in their class. He almost instinctively tried to turn it down, his tone distant and cold. "What does her birthday have to do with me? I'm not going." But Jason didn't give him a second to hesitate. He cut him off right away. "Quit talking and get over here. Chloe specifically asked for you." The call ended. Chris looked down at the half bowl of rice left in front of him and suddenly lost his appetite, because he knew exactly what going meant. He would have to pay his share. Splitting the bill tonight would cost at least $200 or $300. But the problem was, the person who had called him out by name was Chloe herself. Chris didn't really have any friends in class to begin with. Aside from Jason, his overly friendly roommate, almost no one was close to him. So he understood one thing clearly: offending Chloe would do him absolutely no good. Chris set down his bowl and chopsticks, then got up and walked out of the cafeteria. The autumn wind carried a bit of a chill, and he instinctively pulled tighter at the old jacket on his body, the one so worn it had already faded from too many washes. Splendor KTV was not far from campus, and he got there after a 20-minute walk. The server at the entrance gave him a quick look, the kind that clearly carried a little judgment. Chris ignored it and went straight up to the 3rd floor. Room 302 was not fully closed, and the pounding music was spilling right out through the gap. He pushed the door open. The private room was huge, packed with more than 20 people. Fruit platters, snacks, and imported liquor covered the table, and Chloe sat right in the center. Wearing a beautiful dress like a princess, everyone naturally revolved around. The moment Jason saw him, he waved him over. "Chris, here." Chris walked over and sat down on the couch in the corner, barely noticed by anyone. Everyone else was focused on Chloe, some singing, some messing around with dice. Chris only felt more out of place than ever, like even the air in that room smelled like money. After a while, someone said singing was boring and suggested something more exciting, like truth or dare, and the whole room immediately cheered. The bottle started spinning across the table. Chris silently prayed it would not land on him, and a few times it came dangerously close before passing by. Then at last, the bottle pointed straight at Chloe, and the room erupted. One of the guys grinned and asked, "Chloe, truth or dare?" Chloe had been drinking a little, her cheeks lightly flushed as she smiled and answered, "Dare." The guy was named Leo, and he was the type who loved being the center of attention. His eyes shifted, and then he looked straight at Chris. Right after that, he threw out a proposal with a grin. "Chloe, how about making a bet with the one sitting behind you on the right, Chris?" In an instant, every eye in the room landed on Chris, and his whole body stiffened. Chloe turned and looked at him. There was that particular kind of curiosity in her eyes, the kind rich girls had when nothing in the world really felt out of reach. She asked casually, "What kind of bet?" Leo laughed, deliberately raising his voice. "Let's see if you've got the guts to transfer $90,000 to him right now." The room went quiet for a beat, and then the laughter got even louder. One of the girls was the first to react, her eyes going wide in disbelief. "90,000? The guy next to her jumped in right away too, obviously trying to rein it in. "Leo, are you insane? It's just a joke. Do you really have to take it that far?" Leo spread his hands, looking completely unconcerned. "What, so she's scared?" If she is, then make her drink 3 shots. He wanted Chloe to lose face, and he wanted Chris to lose face too. Everyone was staring at Chloe, while Chris felt his face burning hotter and hotter. 90,000 was just a casual number when it came out of their mouths. But only a few days ago, his mother had called to say the family was still 20,000 short on building the house, and the stress was keeping her awake at night. Sitting there, Chris felt like a clown dragged onto a stage. Chloe said nothing. She just kept looking at him, calm and unreadable, with neither mockery nor pity in her eyes. It was almost like she was seriously weighing whether this little dare was worth it. Jason nudged Chris from the side and whispered, "Don't take it seriously. Leo's an idiot." But there was no way Chris could not take it seriously. When someone used money to grind your dignity into the floor, there was no such thing as brushing it off. Then suddenly, Chloe smiled. She gave a small nod. "Sure." Chloe picked up the phone on the table and opened her banking app. Everyone around her froze for a second, still thinking she had to be joking. Then she looked up at Chris again. "What's your phone number?" The room went deathly quiet, with only the music still blasting in the background. Everyone was staring at Chloe, then turning to look at Chris. The smile on Leo's face stiffened instantly, and even Jason was dumbfounded, mouth hanging open without a word coming out. Chris felt the blood rush straight to his head. His phone number. She was asking for his phone number. His throat went dry and he could not force out a single word. Chloe stayed patient, holding up her phone as she asked again, "What's your number?" Chris recited the string of digits almost like a machine. Chloe lowered her head and tapped across the screen at lightning speed. People around the room exchanged looks, and someone whispered under their breath, "She's not seriously sending it, right? That's 90,000. No way someone goes that far just to save face." Chris kept staring at her, and Chloe stayed completely focused the entire time, like she was doing nothing more than some ordinary little task. A few seconds later, she set down her phone and looked up at Leo. "Done." Leo's expression turned ugly on the spot. But Chloe cut him off, her voice flat and calm. "A bet is a bet." After saying that, she picked up a glass of wine and took a sip, as if the whole thing was already over in her mind. Then Chris felt his phone vibrate inside his pocket. His hand shook as he reached in to pull it out. The screen was lit with a bank message. "Your account ending in XXX has received $90,000. Current balance $90,088.82. That long line of zeros stabbed straight into his eyes. The $88.82 had been all he had left to survive the month. And now, with the $90,000 added in, the total had become $90,088.82. Chris shoved the phone back into his pocket, his palm already slick with sweat. Then he stood up. At once, everyone in the room turned to look at him. Their expressions were all mixed together: shock, jealousy, and the ugly excitement of people watching a show. Chris did not say a single word. He just turned around and headed straight for the door. Jason called after him, "Chris, where are you going?" But he never looked back. He walked out of Splendor KTV just like that. The cold wind outside hit him in the face, and Chris shivered, his mind still completely blank. He wandered the streets for a long time, not even knowing where he was supposed to go. When he passed a 24-hour convenience store, he stepped inside, then he stood in front of the shelves for a very long time. In the end, he picked up a cup of the most expensive instant noodles there, 1 sausage and 1 marinated egg. The total at checkout came to $15. Before that, Chris only ever dared to buy the cheap instant noodles that cost $3 a pack. When he carried his things back to the dorm, the room was empty. Jason and the others still had not returned. Chris filled the kettle and started boiling water for the noodles, and as the steam slowly rose, he finally felt like he had come back to life. He sat down at his desk, took out his phone, and read that bank message all over again. 90,000. He kept counting the zeros again and again. That money could keep his mother from lying awake at night worrying about the unfinished house, and it could keep him from surviving on free soup in the cafeteria. It could even buy him that full set of exam prep books by the library that he had been wanting forever. More than that, it could let him live like an actual person. Chris finished the noodles and drank every last drop of the broth. Then he pulled out a notebook and a pen. His hand was still trembling a little, but his eyes had never been clearer. On the very first page of the notebook, he wrote down 4 words: 4-year plan. Then he started calculating everything line by line. 4 years of college meant 48 months, and he set his own living expenses at $800 a month. 48 months came out to $38,400. Tuition was $5,000 a year, so the remaining 3 years would cost another $15,000. Exam prep materials and professional books would probably take $5,000, and his family still needed $20,000 to finish building the house. Altogether, That came to $78,400. The remaining $11,600 would be emergency money, and he could not touch a cent of it. Chris wrote down every single expense in exact detail, because he knew this $90,000 was not some gift dropped from the sky. It was the bet Chloe had lost, and it was also the life he would be living for the next 4 years. He had to make every bit of it count, use it to hold on until graduation, get his degree, and land a real job. Then one day he would pay Chloe back every last cent with interest. By the time he finished writing the last word, the sky outside was already starting to brighten. Chris looked at the packed pages of his plan and felt calmer than he ever had before. The next day, on his way to class, he saw Chloe at the entrance of the academic building. She was standing with a few girls, chatting and laughing. She was not even wearing the same dress he had seen the night before. When Chloe saw Chris, she froze for a second, but in the very next moment, she turned back to her friends as if nothing had happened at all. Chris lowered his head too, and quickly walked into the classroom. It felt like there was $90,000 standing between them. And at the same time, like that $90,000 was the only thing left between them. Chris's life really had changed from that day on. And the first thing to change was the way he ate. From then on, Chris started going to the seafood counter on the second floor. Every time he ordered the shrimp rice bowl that cost $25. The first time he ordered it, even the cafeteria lady froze for a second and gave him an extra look. Chris paid without changing expression, then carried his tray over and sat alone in the corner. The shrimp in the bowl was fresh and springy. He ate slowly, chewing every bite with almost excessive care. Then Joe Howe walked over with his deluxe meal and sat down across from him. The moment he saw the shrimp rice bowl, Joe Howe looked stunned. "Damn, Chris, you hit the jackpot or what? Win the lottery?" Chris stayed calm and only answered flatly, "No." Then he lowered his head and kept eating. Joe Howe kept staring at him suspiciously. "Then what is it?" "Something's off with you, man." After that, he lowered his voice and leaned in. "About what happened last night?" Before he could finish, Chris cut him off coldly. "Eat." Seeing that Chris clearly did not want to talk, Joe Howe smacked his lips and stopped asking. Even so, he still kept shooting Chris strange looks from time to time. As for the milk tea shop downstairs from the dorm, Chris used to do nothing more than walk past it. But now, every afternoon he would buy the cheapest lemonade there. $8. Even the junior girl working there had started recognizing him. "Senior, lemonade again today?" Chris nodded and answered simply, "Yeah." Then he carried that cup in his hand and slowly walked back to the dorm. One cup was enough for him to sip on for a full hour. The drink tasted sour with just a little sweetness in it. In the library bookstore, the newest set of graduate exam prep materials for his major came in 12 volumes and cost $880. Chris had looked at them countless times before, but every time he only flipped through them and never dared buy them. This time though, he walked straight into the shop and told the owner, "I'll take the whole set." While the owner was packing the books, Chris had already paid. Then, he walked out of the store carrying that heavy stack of brand new books in his arms. The sunlight on his body felt a little warm. From that moment on, he no longer had to fight for seats in the library or copy other people's old notes, because he finally had weapons of his own. That weekend, his mother called again. Her voice was still thick with worry. "Chris, your dad tried borrowing money again, but nobody was willing." Chris felt his heart tighten and quickly said, "Mom, stop borrowing." On the other end, his mother let out a long sigh, helpless and anxious. "If we don't borrow, then what are we supposed to do? The contractor keeps pushing us." Chris gripped his phone tighter, took a deep breath, and forced his voice to sound light. "I have it here." The line fell silent. After a long while, his mother finally spoke again, already sounding choked up. "You have it? Where did you get that kind of money? Did you do something stupid out there?" Chris's voice stayed calm. "No. The school gave me a scholarship, and with what I saved before, I can come up with $20,000. His mother still clearly did not believe it, her voice full of hesitation. "A scholarship? How could it be that much?" Chris lied without even blinking. "It was a national scholarship." His mother's voice still trembled after hearing that. "Then, what about your own living expenses?" Chris softened his tone and tried to calm her down. "I have enough. Just send me the card number. I'll go to the bank this afternoon." After hanging up, he went straight to the bank and transferred $20,000 over. When he walked out of the bank, it felt like even the sky looked a little bluer than usual. After that, Chris crossed off the first expense in his notebook. From then on, he stopped tutoring and stopped helping in the cafeteria kitchen too. Every spare minute he had was thrown straight into studying. Living in the library, grinding through study sessions, and chewing through those textbook-thick professional books became his daily routine. Chloe was still his classmate. During large lectures, she sat in the front while he stayed in the back. During smaller classes, they would occasionally get assigned to the same group. She never spoke to him first, and Chris never took the initiative to approach her either. One time, a group discussion assignment required pairs to do a presentation. The teacher assigned people randomly, and somehow he ended up paired with Chloe. The rest of the group looked at them with expressions that were hard to read. Because after that night, the whole class already knew. Chloe had thrown away $90,000 on the poorest guy in class. Every kind of rumor started spreading. Some said the two of them were dating, while others said Chris had basically become her kept man. Chloe acted like she heard none of it. She just looked at Chris and asked in an almost mechanical tone, "Which part are you handling?" Chris answered just as calmly, "The last 3 chapters." After that, Chloe turned to discuss things with the others, and the two of them barely exchanged a single extra word the entire time. Chris was the one who gathered the materials, and he was also the one who made the PowerPoint. The day before the presentation, he sent the finished file to Chloe. She replied with only 2 words, "Received." The next day, when they went up front, Chris presented his section, and Chloe presented hers. Their teamwork was not exactly smooth, but nothing went wrong either. And in the end, the teacher gave them a pretty good grade. After they stepped down, Chloe walked in front while Chris followed behind. Just before reaching the door, she suddenly stopped. Then she turned back to look at him. "Nice job." It was the first thing she had said to him since that night. Not a question, not a request, just a flat casual evaluation. Chris answered just as simply, "It's what I should do." Chloe gave a small nod, then turned and walked away. Her back looked exactly the same as it had that night in the KTV, proud and distant, as if that $90,000 really had been nothing more than a game to her. Maybe she did not care, but Chris did. When Chris got back to the dorm, he opened up his 4-year plan notebook. Next to Chloe's name on the first page, he wrote one more line, "Worked together once before." Then he drew a heavy line through it. To him, it felt like a ritual, and also a warning. A reminder that between him and Chloe, there was nothing except money. In his 2nd year of college, Chris won a national scholarship worth $8,000. He did not touch a single cent of it and moved the whole amount into a different bank card. It was income outside his original plan, and also the first real starting fund for the debt repayment plan in his head. After that, Chris kept following his 4-year plan with almost brutal discipline. $800 a month for living expenses. Not a cent more, not a cent less. He even kept a separate little notebook just for expenses, accurate down to every dime. Bought a pen, $1.50, write it down. Ate a meal, $12, write it down. Paid the class fee, $20, write that down too. Looking at those pages full of numbers, Joe Howe could not understand him at all. "Chris, seriously? Do you really have to go this far? You're not broke anymore, so what are you even doing this for?" Chris had no way to explain it to him. Joe Howe would never understand that. To Chris, that $90,000 was never just money. It was more like a rope tied around his neck, and the other end of that rope was still in Chloe's hand. Only by relying on himself and breaking that rope little by little could he ever breathe freely again. In the 2nd semester of sophomore year, the school held its annual sports meet. Every class had mandatory sign-up quotas. The counselor could not find anyone willing to run the 3,000 meters, so Joe Howe casually signed Chris up for it. Right after that, he walked over to Chris and tried to sell it with total confidence. "Chris, you're either running or running to the library every day anyway. Your stamina's gotta be solid. Go win some glory for the class." Chris did not object. Running did not cost money, and it was good for the body. On the day of the race, the weather was brutally hot. He stood at the starting line in the most ordinary pair of running shorts and a sleeveless shirt. The gun went off, and Chris ran out at his own pace. He was not aiming for a ranking. He just wanted to finish the race, but by the final lap, he was already completely spent. Sweat blurred his vision, and his lungs felt like they were burning alive. As he passed the main stand, Chris instinctively looked up, and then he saw Chloe. She was sitting there with the student union officers. She wore the same official uniform as the others, along with a sun hat. She seemed to be saying something to the person next to her, a faint smile resting on her face. Under the sunlight, her skin looked almost glowing white, but she was not looking at the track. She was not looking at Chris either. In her world, this sports meet that already bored her was probably still less important than some casual remark in a conversation with friends. Chris pulled his gaze back, gritted his teeth, and kept running forward. The instant he crossed the finish line, his whole body felt completely drained dry. In the next second, he collapsed straight onto the ground. Joe Howe immediately ran over to help him up, then shoved a bottle of water into his hand. His mouth kept going the whole time. "4th place, Chris, damn, that was awesome. You were this close to getting a medal." Chris was gasping for air in huge, ragged breaths and could not force out a single full sentence. He only felt, all of a sudden, that the distance between him and Chloe looked exactly like that 3,000-meter track. He was the one down here running with everything he had, drenched in sweat and looking pathetic. And she was always up there on the high stand, calm and untouched by any of it. That night, after returning to the dorm, Chris opened his 4-year plan notebook again. Then he carefully wrote down one line: repayment plan. Starting fund, $8,000. Target, $90,000 in full. Because by this point, it was no longer some vague fantasy in his head. He had finally laid down the first real stone under his feet. Time passed quickly, and Chris's life gradually turned into something like a fixed program. Class, meals, library, sleep. He rarely joined group activities, and he rarely spoke to anyone either. Most of the class had already gotten used to him being alone all the time. To them, Chris was just that weird guy with terrifyingly good grades. But only Chris himself knew that he did not dare stop. Because he was afraid that the second he did, the weight of that massive sum would come crashing down and crush him. In junior year, Chris started helping a professor with a project and got a monthly stipend of $500. On top of that, he also picked up random programming gigs online in his spare time. It was exhausting, and many nights dragged on past midnight. But because of that, his repayment account grew by another $1,000 or $2,000 every month. Only when he saw that number rise little by little did he finally feel even a trace of stability. Chloe's life, on the other hand, seemed like it never changed at all. She was still the center of every crowd, still dressed in beautiful, polished clothes. She still drove cars to class with brand names Chris could not even recognize, and there was still no real interaction between them. Every now and then, when they crossed paths, her eyes would sweep over him and pause for less than a second. It was the kind of look someone gave to a stranger they somehow happened to know. Chris accepted that reality without resistance because he and Chloe had never belonged to the same world to begin with. That $90,000 had always been both an accident and a transaction. Chloe used money to buy herself a win in a dare, while Chris traded his pride and 4 years of his life for a chance to change his fate. Even now, that transaction was still ongoing, and he was still doing everything he could to become a worthy other party in that deal. Before long, senior year arrived. There were fewer classes now, and everyone had started scrambling for the future waiting ahead of them. Some were preparing for graduate school, some were hunting for jobs, and others were trying for the civil service. Every day, the dorm hallways were filled with the sound of phone calls for interviews, mixed now and then with muffled crying. Someone could not quite hold back. Chris was busy too. He had to finish his graduation project while also preparing for written tests and interviews with several major companies. And his 4-year plan was finally nearing its end. In the notebook, every single expense was recorded with exact clarity. That $90,000 had been squeezed for every bit of value it could possibly give. He had used that money to arm his mind, and he had also used it to preserve the bare minimum of dignity in his life. As for Chloe, he heard she was preparing to go abroad. Jo-Hao was the one who told Chris, saying her family had arranged everything for her long ago. Ivy League degree, then straight into Wall Street, a life anyone would call winning. Chris only nodded after hearing it, with almost no emotion on his face, because that had always been the life Chloe was meant to have. One ordinary afternoon, Chris walked out of the library and started heading back to the dorm. As he passed the school's artificial lake, he suddenly spotted a familiar figure. It was Chloe. She was sitting alone on a bench by the lake, with no friends around her and none of the usual people who were always by her side. She was wearing a simple white dress, just sitting there quietly, staring at the water in silence. The last light of the sunset fell across her, wrapping her whole figure in a soft golden edge. In that moment, she looked nothing like her usual self. There was none of that distant pride that always kept people away. Only a faint sense of loneliness, and even something fragile. Chris stopped walking and stayed under the shade of a nearby tree. He had no idea why Chloe was sitting there alone. Maybe something had gone wrong with her applications. Maybe she had fought with her friends. Thought after thought flashed through his mind, but none of them gave him a real answer. Chloe just kept sitting there in silence. The wind by the lake gently lifted her long hair. After a while, she took a small object out of her bag. It looked like a delicate little music box. She gently wound it up. Soon, a clear and beautiful melody began to flow out. The tune was Castle in the Sky. Chloe held the music box in both hands, lowered her head, and stayed completely still. Chris couldn't make out Chloe's expression clearly, but he could still feel a quiet sadness slowly spreading from her. This was a side of Chloe he had never seen before. In his mind, She had always been dazzling, untouchable, like someone who could handle anything in the world. She could transfer 90,000 without even blinking. And she could finish a collaboration with him with that same emotionless calm. She had always seemed like a perfect sculpture with no feelings at all. But now, that sculpture seemed to have cracked just a little. Chris suddenly remembered freshman year, remembered the look on Chloe's face after she sent him the money and lifted her head to say, "A bet is a bet." Back then, she had looked calm and indifferent. Yet, deep in her eyes, there had seemed to be something else. Something he could not understand at all at the time. What exactly was it? Chris didn't know. He simply stood there beneath the tree for a very, very long time. He stayed until the sky turned fully dark and the lamps by the lake lit up one after another. Only then did Chloe put the music box away. Then she slowly stood up and left the lake by herself. From beginning to end, she never realized Chris had been standing there. After returning to the dorm, Chris did something he almost never did. He didn't open his expense notebook, and he didn't look at his payment plan either. He just sat at his desk and stared blankly for a long time. What kept replaying in his mind was Chloe's back as she sat by the lake, along with the melody from Castle in the Sky. And for the first time, Chris realized that Chloe might not be the person she always seemed to be. Beneath that glamorous, polished world around her, maybe she had her own loneliness and troubles, too. That 90,000 might truly have meant nothing to her. But that dare and those words, "A bet is a bet," what had they really meant to her? It was the first time Chris had ever truly started thinking about that question. But no matter how long he thought about it, he still could not find an answer. Because between him and Chloe, there had always been a world he could never cross. So the only thing he could do was finish their transaction as soon as possible, then leave her world completely and cleanly behind. Back in the dorm, Chris opened his laptop and started revising his resume again and again. He knew interview notices would be coming soon, and he had to land the best offer out of all of them. Graduation drew closer day by day. In the end, Chris secured an offer from one of the top internet companies in the country, with salary and benefits even better than he had expected. The day he signed the contract, he walked out of the company building, stood under the sun, and let out one long breath. 4 years of restraint and struggle had finally paid off. The first thing he did was call home and tell his mother the news. She cried on the other end of the line, repeating the same sentence over and over. "My son made it. My son really made it." Chris felt his own eyes grow hot too. That night, when he returned to the dorm, he opened his 4-year plan notebook again. On the last page was his financial summary. Income, exactly $90,000. Tuition paid, $15,000. Living expenses, 46 months at $800 a month, totaling $36,800. Books and study materials, $4,800. Family support, $20,000. Miscellaneous expenses, including class fees and ID photos, $1,300. Total core spending, $77,900. And that was only the core account. All the scattered little expenses had been recorded in another notebook. Over 4 years, he had nearly squeezed every last cent out of that 90,000. Chris checked the balance on the bank card again. It had once held 90,088.82. Now there was only 0.82 left. Perfect. Everything had closed out exactly according to plan. Chris shut the notebook. This little book, which had carried 4 years of his youth, humiliation, and struggle, had finally completed its mission. His repayment account had already grown to over 30,000, still far from the full 90,000 target. But now he had a stable, high-paying job and a clear ability to repay what he owed. What remained was only a matter of time. On the day of graduation, the weather was bright and clear. Everyone was dressed in caps and gowns, taking photos all over campus like crazy. Laughter, hugs, and goodbyes were everywhere. Chris, meanwhile, stood quietly outside the crowd, like an outsider. He did not have many friends. The only one he was relatively close to, Zane, had already signed with a company back in his hometown and was leaving by train that afternoon. As for Chloe, Chris searched all morning and never once spotted her in the crowd. Maybe she had not come at all. For someone like her, maybe a graduation ceremony was never something that mattered much in the first place. Chris could not tell whether what he felt was disappointment or relief. He had prepared for this moment for a long time and had wanted to thank her in person today. He had also wanted to tell her that he would pay the money back. But now he could not even find her. Just as Chris was about to leave, a voice came from behind him. "Chris." He spun around at once. It was Chloe. She was wearing her graduation gown too, her long hair resting over her shoulders, a light touch of makeup making her look impossibly beautiful. She stood there alone not far away, quietly watching him. Then she said, "Congratulations. So you got your offer too." Chris felt his throat tighten, and when he answered, his voice came out dry. "Yeah, I got it." Chloe gave a small nod. "That's good." Silence quickly fell between them, while around them people kept moving, laughing, and celebrating. The two of them stood there, like a separate silent shot cut out from a film. Chris wanted to bring up the money. He even wanted to show Chloe the account where he had already saved more than $30,000 and tell her about the repayment plan. But when the words reached his mouth, he swallowed them back down, because in front of Chloe, who was about to leave for Wall Street, his salary and his plan suddenly felt almost ridiculous. He did not want to expose his embarrassment and smallness in front of her ever again. Chris was just about to say something, anything, when Chloe spoke first. "I'm leaving. For the US." Chris answered softly, "Safe travels." Chloe looked at him, and there was something deep in her gaze. Then she called his name again. "Chris, you don't have to pay that money back." Chris froze, but Chloe continued in the same calm voice. "I lost that bet. It had nothing to do with you." After saying that, she paused for a moment, then added, "You already won what you wanted through your own effort, didn't you?" And before Chris could answer, she turned and walked away. All he could do was watch her back disappear into the crowd, farther and farther away. Soon, a black sedan pulled up at the school gate, and Chloe got in. Before long, the car was gone from sight. Chris stood where he was for a very, very long time, without moving. In his hands, he held his diploma and degree certificate, and they felt impossibly heavy. Chloe told him he did not have to pay it back, told him he had already won. Yet all Chris felt after hearing that was an even deeper emptiness. Because this transaction had been unilaterally ended by her. He did not even have the chance to repay the debt anymore. The rope between him and Chloe, the one he had fought with everything he had to break on his own, was cut clean through by one casual wave of her hand. Chris felt like he had thrown a punch with every ounce of strength he had, only for it to sink into cotton, leaving him completely helpless and lost. 4 years had ended. Chris had thought that meant his story with Chloe had ended too. At least, that was what he believed back then. But on his first day at work, HR took Chris around the company. In front of the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, the skyline outside was packed with towering skyscrapers. Everyone moved in a rush, their faces carrying that elite mix of exhaustion and excitement. The air smelled like caffeine and money blended together. It reminded him of Splendor KTV from 4 years earlier, and yet it was completely different. Back there, money had meant indulgence and games. Here, money meant goals and fuel. Chris adapted to this life very quickly. Or more accurately, he slid straight into the same mode of living he had already built over 4 years in college. Disciplined, efficient, and clear about the goal. If everyone else arrived at 9, he arrived at 8. If everyone else left at 6, he often worked late into the night. His coworkers all started calling Chris the Grind King. At first it was teasing, but later it slowly turned into respect. Chris did not care, because what they were chasing were promotions, raises, year-end bonuses, and stock options. What he was chasing, from beginning to end, was only one number: 90,000. He opened a brand new bank account just for that, and every time his salary hit, after leaving himself only the most basic living expenses, he transferred all the rest into it. He no longer forced himself to live under a hard limit of $800 a month like he had in college. But the habit of frugality never changed. He did not buy luxury goods, and he did not waste time on pointless socializing. The only thing that counted as a hobby was going to the gym downstairs from the office. Chris's life was as simple as a straight line. After 1 year, he had become one of the core performers on his team. After 2 years, he was independently leading an important project. That year, his year-end bonus hit 6 figures for the first time. By the 3rd year, he had been promoted to project manager. He was finally leading a small team of his own. By then, the number in his repayment account had already passed 90,000 long ago. He had even calculated the interest for Chloe. Using the highest wealth management rate the bank offered, he worked it out across 8 years and rounded it all into one clean number: 120,000. The money was ready, but the creditor had vanished. After graduation, Chloe seemed to disappear from the world entirely. Chris tried looking for her and searched through nearly every social platform he could think of, but he never found a single active account named Chloe that matched who she was. He asked Zane too, but Zane knew nothing either. Over the phone, Zane only said casually, "She went to the US. She was never in the same world as us to begin with. How would there still be any contact?" Later, Zane went back to his hometown, got a stable public sector job, and started preparing for marriage in the usual step-by-step way. Over the years, they still kept in touch once in a while, but all they ever talked about were the small, ordinary things in life. As for Chloe, her name slowly became a taboo, and no one brought it up anymore. Chris left that $120,000 sitting untouched in the account. It felt like a cold gravestone, commemorating that humiliating, twisted stretch of youth, where he had fought so hard to climb upward, and at the same time, like a task that could never truly be completed, reminding him every moment that he still owed someone. By the 4th year, Chris had finally made the down payment on a place in the city. It was not large, but it had a great view. He bought a car too, not some luxury model, but enough to give him his own moving shell of steel in a city this huge. One night, Chris stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window of his apartment, looking out over the sea of lights beyond the glass. He had his own career now. He had his own home and his own car. By the most ordinary worldly standards, he had already made it. He had finally become the kind of man he once most wanted to be. But deep inside Chris, the hollow Chloe had left behind had never really been filled. Sometimes he even found himself wondering how she was doing in the US. Would someone as proud as a princess make new friends in a foreign country? Did she still play Truth or Dare? Would she still change the fate of some poor kid's life as casually as she had back then? Chris did not know. He only knew that if he could not find Chloe, this debt would follow him for the rest of his life. Then, one Friday night, the old college class group chat that had been silent for ages suddenly came back to life. The class monitor posted an announcement saying there would be a 4th-year reunion the following weekend. The location was set at the buffet restaurant of a 5-star hotel. The group chat exploded almost immediately. "Wow, 4 years already. Nice one, class monitor. Everyone's still in town, better show up." Chris looked at the flashing profile pictures and endless messages, but felt no real interest at all. His life now barely overlapped with those college classmates anymore. If he went, it would just be people comparing lives and bragging about how things were going. He had no desire to waste his time on that. Just as Chris was about to close the chat app, a private message from Zane suddenly popped up. "Chris, you going to the reunion or what?" Chris typed back with 2 words. "Not going." Zane immediately tried to talk him into it. "Come on, man. It's been 4 years. Go see the old classmates." Then he added another line. "Heard Leo's coming too. That guy's doing pretty well now. Started his own company." The instant Chris saw the name Leo, it felt like a thorn stabbed straight into his nerves. Back in that KTV room, it had been Leo who proposed the $90,000 bet, in that flippant, vicious tone. It was Leo who nailed Chris to that post of humiliation. So Chris refused without hesitation. "You go. I've got to work overtime this weekend." But Zane did not buy it at all. "Cut it out. You're already a manager now. You really still need to work overtime every day? Just come out, all right? I haven't seen you in forever either. I specifically flew in from home for this." Chris realized he could not really refuse anymore. On the day of the reunion, he drove to the hotel. The parking lot was packed with luxury cars. BMWs, Mercedes, Porsches. Everywhere he looked, Chris parked his own car off in the corner. And in that moment, he suddenly felt like he was still the same poor student who had once walked into Splendor KTV. The only difference was that this time, he was wearing a decent suit, and he had enough money in his pocket to pay for this expensive dinner. By the time he pushed open the private room door, it was already full of people. A lot of them had changed. Either they had gained weight or they had gone bald. The moment Chris walked in, several people immediately stood up and greeted him with surprising enthusiasm. Some of them grinned and called out, "Chris." Others sounded half joking and half shocked. "Damn, you really turned into a big shot now." A few even came over with drinks in hand, greeting him with exaggerated politeness. "Chris, finally get to see you in person." The classmates who used to look straight through him now all wore bright, eager smiles on their faces. Chris responded with polite restraint, then found a seat in the corner. Leo was there, just as expected. He was dressed head to toe in designer labels, wearing gold-rimmed glasses, looking every bit like a polished fraud. The second he noticed Chris, he picked up his drink and walked over on his own. Then he dropped into the seat beside him and said with a smile, Chris, long time no see. Heard you're killing it at that big name company. Chris answered flatly, "It's all right." Leo lightly tapped his glass against Chris's, smiling in that loaded way of his. "Come on, no need to be humble. In our class, it used to be you and Chloe. Actually, no. Now it's just you." He deliberately brought up her name, then deliberately stopped himself. Chris looked at him and said nothing. A few rounds of drinks later, the room had fully loosened up, and people started swapping stories from back in college. Then, someone suddenly brought up Chloe. "Speaking of it, how's our class beauty Chloe doing these days? She's probably some Wall Street elite in the US by now, right?" The moment those words came out, the room suddenly went quiet. Everyone exchanged glances, and the expressions on their faces turned strange. Leo tipped back his drink and let out a mocking laugh. "Wall Street elite? You people seriously living in a fantasy, or what?" One of the girls could not help asking, "Leo, do you know something we don't?" Leo was clearly enjoying the feeling of being the center of attention. He cleared his throat and spoke slowly. "Her family went bankrupt a long time ago. You guys seriously didn't know?" The whole room froze. "Bankrupt? Are you serious?" Leo's tone even carried a trace of smug delight. "Of course it's true. Must have been around 2 years ago. Her dad's investment blew up. Somebody screwed him over, the cash flow snapped, and they ended up drowning in debt. I heard it was in the hundreds of millions." Someone sucked in a sharp breath. "Hundreds of millions? Then what happened to Chloe?" Leo spread his hands, not a hint of sympathy on his face. "Her parents were smart enough. They ran overseas overnight, and they're still being wanted now. Poor little Princess Chloe got left behind all alone and ended up carrying every bit of that debt herself. I even heard not long ago that the court auctioned off every asset under her name. She's basically blacklisted now. Can't even take high-speed rail or flights anymore." Man, talk about how the tables turn. The moment those words fell, the entire private room went dead silent. Everyone was too stunned by the news to say a thing. Chris felt the blood in his body turn cold in an instant. His ears rang, and whatever Leo said after that, Chris did not hear a single word of it. There was only one thought left in his head. Chloe had fallen. The girl who had once shone like the sun, the girl who had once pulled him up with $90,000, had really fallen all the way down. Chris shot to his feet. The chair scraped hard against the floor, with a sharp grating sound. Every eye in the room turned to him at once. But Chris did not say anything. He simply turned and walked out. He strode straight out of the hotel. The cold wind hit his face outside, but he could not feel even the slightest chill. Chris sat in the car, both hands clamped tight around the steering wheel, and suddenly realized he had no idea where to go. There was only one thought left in Chris's mind: find her. From that day on, he started looking for Chloe like a man gone mad. For the first time in 4 years, he pulled every resource he could possibly use. He hired a private investigator to track down Chloe's whereabouts. And he also asked co-workers from the company's legal department to search public court record systems for debt cases connected to her. Little by little, information started flowing back to him. Everything Leo had said was true. In fact, the reality was even worse than Leo had made it sound. Chloe's father's company had already gone through bankruptcy liquidation, and Chloe, as one of the guarantors, had been ruled jointly liable for the debt. Her properties, her car, and every cent in her bank accounts had all been frozen and auctioned off to pay what she owed. But even that was only a drop in the bucket. She had been placed on the blacklist for dishonest debtors, the kind of person people casually called a deadbeat. She was under high consumption restrictions, meaning no flights and no high-speed rail. An invisible net had wrapped itself around her and pinned her to the very bottom of the city. The final update the private investigator gave Chris was this. Half a year earlier, Chloe had been renting a basement unit in an old rundown neighborhood. Later, when she could no longer afford the rent, the landlord kicked her out. After that, she disappeared completely, and the trail ended there. Chris parked his car outside that old neighborhood and stood there for a very long time, staring at the dark, damp entrance leading down into the basement level. He simply could not imagine how Chloe had fallen all the way from the clouds into a pit like this, and he could not imagine how she had endured all of it alone. For the next several months, Chris drifted through every corner of the city, like a ghost. After work, he no longer went home. Instead, he drove to all the places where homeless people might gather: underpasses, parks, subway entrances, 24-hour fast food shops. Every time he caught sight of a thin female figure, his heart would clench hard in his chest. But every single time, it was not Chloe. Chris even started wondering whether he would never find her again for the rest of his life. Maybe Chloe had already left the city. Maybe she was not even alive anymore. The thought sent a chill straight through Chris. It was a winter night, bitterly cold. Chris had just finished a full week of closed-door development work at the company, and he was exhausted to the bone, both mentally and physically. It was already 1 in the morning. He was driving alone through the empty streets. When he passed an overpass, a rear-end collision up ahead had blocked the road completely. Chris had no choice but to turn off onto a side road and go around beneath the bridge. Under that overpass was the kind of place where homeless people always spent the night. They used cardboard and torn old blankets to piece together one crude shelter after another. Chris drove slowly, his headlights sweeping across those curled-up figures one by one. By now, his heart had already gone numb from searching for so long. But just as the headlights were about to pass over the last makeshift shelter, his movement suddenly froze. There was someone lying there, wrapped in a filthy, tattered army coat, curled tightly into a ball. At first glance, that figure looked no different from all the others. But outside the heap of dirty bedding, one foot was exposed. On it was a canvas shoe. The original color was almost impossible to tell anymore, but Chris recognized the style instantly. It was the kind of shoe he had seen countless times in those cheap shoe stores near the university. Chloe would never have worn shoes like that. And yet, for some reason, Chris's heart suddenly started pounding like crazy. He pulled the car over to the side of the road and killed the engine. The moment he stepped out, the winter wind cut across his face like a blade. But Chris barely felt it as he walked toward that figure, one step at a time. The whole place was eerily quiet, with nothing but the wind and the pounding of his own heartbeat. When he reached that makeshift shelter, Chris slowly crouched down. Under the dim yellow glow of a distant street lamp, he finally saw her face clearly. It was filthy. Her hair was tangled together like dried grass. Her cheeks were so hollow she was almost unrecognizable. Her lips were cracked and peeling, but that familiar outline and those brows and eyes that still carried a trace of stubborn pride even when closed made Chris certain in a single instant it was her. It really was Chloe. His breathing stopped. It felt like a heavy hammer had smashed straight into his chest, leaving him in so much pain he could not even speak. Maybe sensing someone nearby, Chloe's body shifted slightly. Her eyelids trembled, then slowly forced open the narrowest slit. Those eyes that had once been clear and bright, the same eyes that used to look at Chris with a hint of curiosity and distance, now held nothing but endless exhaustion and emptiness. She looked at him, but her gaze was unfocused, like her mind had not fully caught up yet. Chris just looked back at her, looked at that blank confusion in her eyes. Then he held out his hand to her, palm open, just like she had once done for him at graduation 4 years ago, and in a voice calm but impossible to refuse, he asked, "Come with me?" Chloe's pupils suddenly tightened. In an instant, those hollow eyes filled with shock and disbelief. Chloe stared at Chris without blinking, then lowered her eyes to the hand he had held out to her. In the very next second, huge tears welled up in those dimmed eyes. They rolled down her filthy cheeks in a silent, violent stream. Those tears felt like a glacier that had been frozen for far too long, finally melting and collapsing at this exact moment. There was no wailing, no sobbing, just a quiet, endless flow that washed away the grime on her face and left clear streaks behind. Chris did not rush her, and Chloe did not say a word. They stayed like that, one crouching, one lying there, locked in silence beneath the overpass in the city's knife-cold wind. It was as if the whole world had been muted, leaving only the distant hiss of tires on the road and her despair-soaked tears, so quiet they were almost swallowed by the wind. After a long time, Chris finally rose to his feet. He took off the expensive cashmere coat he was wearing, bent down and gently draped it over her frail body. The coat still held his warmth, along with the faint scent of the high-end woody cologne on him. That warmth and clean fragrance stood in harsh contrast to the sour, damp smell clinging to her. Chloe's body jolted hard, as if she had been burned. Her tears came even harder. She tried to push the coat away, but she was too weak. Her arm only lifted halfway before dropping helplessly back down. Chris did not give her the chance to refuse. He crouched down again, then gripped her freezing arm with quiet force and pulled her up from that heap of filthy bedding. She was shockingly light as a feather. Chris was almost holding her halfway in his arms, just to keep her swaying body from collapsing. Chloe stumbled badly, every single step painfully difficult. From the underpass to where his car was parked at the roadside was only a few dozen meters. Yet it felt like it took them forever. Chris opened the car door and settled her into the front passenger seat. Curled up in the wide seat, she looked even smaller than before. Wrapped in his coat, she looked like a child who had stolen an adult's clothes. Chris shut the door, walked around to the driver's side, got in, and turned the heat all the way up. As the warm air began to blow, Chloe started trembling even harder. Her teeth chattered uncontrollably. It was the body's shock response after going from extreme cold into sudden warmth. Chris did not ask where she wanted to go, and he did not ask what had happened to her over all these years. He simply started the car and drove steadily into the late-night traffic. Chloe did not say a word. She only turned her head and watched the neon lights racing backward outside the window. All that glittering brightness fell into her hollow eyes without stirring even the slightest ripple. She looked like a puppet whose soul had been pulled out, no longer interested in the glamorous world that had once belonged to her. The car eventually pulled into the underground garage of Chris's apartment complex. He killed the engine, got out, walked around to her side, opened the door for her, and said quietly, "We're here." Chloe did not move. She kept the same posture, still staring out the window. Chris did not rush her. He simply waited. After a long while, she finally turned her head and looked at him, her eyes full of confusion and uncertainty. Chris held out his hand to her, just like he had under the bridge. This time, Chloe hesitated for a second, then slowly placed her freezing hand, dirty and marked with tiny cuts, into his palm. Chris closed his fingers around hers and gently helped her out of the car. When they stepped into the elevator, the polished mirrored walls reflected them with brutal clarity. One of them wore a sharp suit and carried himself like the perfect image of a city elite. The other was dressed in rags, gaunt and worn down, like a refugee who had wandered in from another world. The contrast felt absurd and painfully real. Chris unlocked the apartment door with his fingerprint. Warm, bright lights spilled out at once. His apartment was not large, but it was spotless. Minimalist, Nordic style. Everything neat, everything in place. Chloe stopped at the doorway and did not dare step in. She lowered her eyes to the canvas shoes on her feet, so dirty their original color was impossible to tell. Then looked at the polished wooden floor and instinctively drew her foot back. Chris took a brand new pair of slippers from the shoe cabinet and placed them in front of her. Chloe hesitated, then slowly changed into them. After that, she followed him into the living room with stiff, mechanical movements. Chris pointed toward the bathroom. "Go take a shower. There's plenty of hot water. There are clean towels and fresh clothes in the cabinet." He did not have any women's clothing in the apartment, so the best he could do was pull out a brand new cotton tracksuit from his closet, one he had never worn before. Chloe moved like a machine following instructions and quietly walked into the bathroom. Soon, the sound of running water came from inside. Chris turned and went into the kitchen, opening the refrigerator. It was packed with imported ingredients: milk, steaks, fresh vegetables, fruit. But standing there, he found himself not knowing what to make for her. Her stomach probably could not handle anything heavy right now. In the end, Chris scooped out a small bowl of rice from the rice bin. He washed it clean, put it into a clay pot, then turned the flame low and slowly started cooking the simplest plain porridge for her. The sound of running water from the bathroom went on for a very, very long time. So long that Chris started wondering if something might have happened to her in there. Just when he was finally about to knock on the door, the water stopped. Another 10 or so minutes passed before the bathroom door was gently pulled open. Chloe slowly walked out, her wet hair hanging over her shoulders, dressed in the set of sportswear that was far too big on her. The pant legs were way too long, hanging loose around her ankles. It was as if the hot water had finally washed a whole layer of dust and despair off her, letting her real self show through again. She was very pale, but not in a healthy way. It was the bloodless, sickly kind of white. She was frighteningly thin too, with sharp cheekbones, hollow eye sockets, and a chin so pointed it was almost shocking. That face that had once been proud and radiant now held nothing but exhaustion and a fragile, broken edge. Chloe did not dare look at Chris. She only kept her head lowered. Both hands were clutching nervously at the hem of her clothes. Chris scooped the porridge into a bowl and set it down on the dining table. Then, he gently pushed it toward her and said in a calm voice, "Eat something." Chloe lowered her eyes to the bowl of white porridge steaming softly in front of her. Then, she looked up at Chris again. Those eyes, still damp from the hot water, quickly filled with tears all over again. One drop, then another, fell straight into the porridge, sending out tiny ripples across the surface. But in the end, she still reached out and picked up the bowl. Her hands were shaking so badly that the ceramic spoon kept tapping against the rim with a light, brittle sound. Chloe lowered her head and began taking the porridge into her mouth, one small spoonful at a time, along with the tears that had fallen into it. At first, she was only swallowing mechanically. Then it was as if a hunger she had held down for far too long was finally waking back up. She gradually started eating faster. Before long, the first bowl was empty. Chris did not say a thing. He simply took the bowl from her hands, then filled it halfway again. Chloe did not refuse. She only took it back in silence and kept eating. After finishing the second bowl, she finally set the spoon down, slowly. With something warm in her stomach at last, a little bit of color seemed to return to her face. At least it was no longer that terrifying shade of dead white. Chris cleared away the dishes. Then he lifted a hand and pointed toward the guest room beside the master bedroom. "You can sleep in there. Get some rest." The door to the guest room stood open. Inside was a neatly made bed with clean sheets, a wardrobe, and a window overlooking the city lights. Chloe stood at the doorway, staring at that soft, clean bed with obvious longing in her eyes. Yet she still did not dare step forward, as if it were not a bed at all, but a dream she no longer deserved to have. Chris's voice came softly from behind her. "Go on in." Chloe seemed to snap awake, only then, lowered her head and hurried into the room. Then, she gently closed the door behind her. Chris returned to his own bedroom, but there was not the slightest trace of sleep in him. From the room next door, he could faintly hear tiny sounds, the kind that felt like broken sobs crushed down to the very limit. His heart felt like it was being squeezed tighter and tighter by an invisible hand. He had found her, he had brought her home. This should have been the moment he had imagined countless times, the moment of redemption, the moment of repayment. But there was no relief in him, no joy at all. Only a heavy kind of pain he could not even put into words. The girl who had once pulled him out of the mud like a god, with $90,000 in one hand, now needed a single bowl of plain porridge from him, just to hold on to the most basic kind of survival. In that moment, the absurdity and cruelty of fate could not have been clearer. Over the next few days, a strange and fragile understanding formed between them. Chris kept going to work every day like usual, while Chloe stayed in the apartment. She slept for an unbelievably long time. On the first day alone, she slept almost 20 full hours. It was as if she were trying to reclaim, all at once, every bit of safe sleep she had lost over the years. She still did not speak, and there was still no real communication between them. Before leaving for work, Chris would make a simple breakfast and leave it on the table. After work, he would bring dinner home. He bought her a new phone and got her a new SIM card too. He also bought her a lot of new clothes. Not expensive dresses like the ones she used to wear, but the simplest, most comfortable hoodies, t-shirts, and jeans. He placed them all neatly in the wardrobe in her room. Chloe would quietly eat the food he prepared and wear the clothes he bought. Yet she still seems like a transparent shadow living in the apartment, so quiet she barely felt real. Chris could sense that this silence was the last miserable thread of dignity she still had left, and she was holding on to it with everything she had. She did not want to talk to him, because the moment she opened her mouth, it would mean admitting everything, her failure, her ruin, and the fact that she now needed his charity and pity to survive. Chris knew the only thing he could do was give her time. The first real change came on the fourth day. When he got home from work that evening, he found that the dishes he had left piled in the sink that morning had been carefully washed and neatly arranged on the drying rack. Even the floor of the apartment had been cleaned, and it was tidier than when he usually did it himself. When Chris walked into the living room, he saw Chloe sitting quietly on the couch. She was no longer hiding in her room like she had been for the past few days. She was only sitting there, in silence, looking out at the city outside the floor-to-ceiling window, washed in the colors of dusk, her back so thin it looked almost like paper. The moment she heard Chris come in, her shoulder gave the faintest tremor. She stood up and turned to face him. Her lips moved slightly, as if she wanted to say something, but in the end, she still said nothing. She only lowered her head and started to go back to her room. Chris stopped her. "Wait." Chloe froze with her back still turned toward him. Chris took a slow breath and said as calmly as he could, "You don't have to do this." Her whole body stiffened at once. After a long while, she finally turned around. It was the first time since coming back that she truly lifted her eyes and looked straight into his. There was a storm of emotions in them. Gratitude, humiliation, struggle, and something fierce and final that even Chris could not read. Then, at last, she spoke. It was the first sentence she had said to him since returning to this apartment. Her voice was rough and dry, like two sheets of sandpaper scraping together. "I can't stay here for free." Her voice was small, yet it hit Chris like a nail driven straight into his chest. Even now, at a time like this, she was still hung up on that. Deep down, she was still the same proud Chloe. Chris looked at her, his chest full of emotions too tangled to name. Then he turned and walked into the study. From the deepest drawer in his bookshelf, he pulled out a notebook. It was an ordinary notebook, its cover already worn at the edges. Chris returned to the living room, walked up to her, opened it, and held it out. Chloe lowered her eyes in confusion, but the moment her gaze landed on the 4 words written across the first page, her pupils contracted sharply. The words read, 4-year plan. Underneath them was Chris's neat, careful handwriting, laying out every single detail of how he had planned to use that $90,000. Tuition, living expenses, books and study materials, money sent home. Every single line was recorded with brutal clarity. Chris lifted a hand and pointed at the line marked living expenses. His voice was quiet, but every word landed clean. Back then, your $90,000 paid for 4 years of my life. Now it's my turn. Chloe stared blankly at the notebook, at the dense rows of numbers and words covering the page. To her, it may have been nothing more than a reckless dare from long ago, something she had already forgotten. But to someone else, it had become 4 full years of youth, a contract for survival carried out with something close to reverence and something close to obsession. Her fingers began to tremble uncontrollably. She reached out, wanting to touch those familiar and unfamiliar words on the paper. Yet her hand stopped in midair, not daring to come down. And in those dead, empty eyes that had stayed silent for days, something finally shattered completely. That 4-year plan notebook was like a key, finally prying open the emotional floodgate Chloe had kept sealed for so long. She could no longer hold together that fragile calm that looked ready to shatter at the slightest touch. She covered her face with both hands, slowly sank down, and her shoulders began to shake violently. The sob she had buried for far too long finally started slipping through her fingers. It was no longer silent crying, and it was no longer restrained sniffles. It was a full collapse, a raw, wrenching breakdown that seemed to tear straight out of her chest, as if she wanted to cry out every ounce of grievance, pain, despair, and fear she had carried through all those years. Chris did not go over to hold her, and he did not offer any empty words of comfort, because he knew the last thing she needed right now was cheap sympathy. What she needed was an opening, somewhere she could completely fall apart and let everything out. So he only stood there, quietly. He set a box of tissues gently by her side. Like a silent guardian, he let her sobs echo through the still apartment without interruption. Chloe cried for a very long time, until her voice turned hoarse and her body trembled from sheer exhaustion. Before it finally began to fade, she stayed crouched on the floor like a lost child, her shoulders still jerking in uneven little tremors. Chris poured her a glass of warm water and held it out to her. Chloe took it and only drank a small sip, but little by little her emotions began to settle. When he saw that she had calmed down a little, Chris finally said in a gentle voice, "Get up. The floor's cold." Supporting herself against the couch, she slowly rose on unsteady legs and sat back down. Chris placed the notebook back on the coffee table in front of her. The living room fell into another long stretch of silence. After what felt like forever, Chloe finally spoke in a voice so hoarse, it sounded close to breaking. "I'm sorry." Chris looked at her, a little surprised. Chloe lowered her head, guilt filling every word. "About back then? I'm sorry. I didn't know. I really didn't know that money meant that much to you." Chris cut in softly. "You don't have to apologize. If anything, I'm the one who should be thanking you. Without that money, there would be no me today. And I mean that. To me, that $90,000 was never just money. It was the one beam of light that broke into the darkest point of my life. It was the only straw I had to grab while I was drowning in the mud. It shaped me, and it made me." Chloe slowly lifted her head and looked at Chris with red-rimmed eyes. Her lips moved faintly, and in the end, she still asked the question. Her voice was soft, so soft it sounded like she was asking him and herself at the same time. "Why are you being so good to me?" Chris looked into those eyes filled with confusion and disbelief, but he did not answer right away. Instead, he took out his phone, unlocked it, opened his banking app, pulled up a specific account page, and handed it to her. Chloe took it from him, still puzzled. But the moment she saw the number on the screen, her whole body froze. Right there on the display, clear as day, it read, "Account balance, $120,000.00. Chloe looked up at Chris in disbelief. "This is," Chris answered calmly, "it's your money. The original $90,000, plus 8 years of interest calculated at the highest wealth management rate. I prepared it a long time ago. I just could never find you." Chloe stared at the string of numbers on the phone screen without blinking. Compared to the crushing debt her family had once carried, that $120,000 was barely a drop in the ocean. But she knew, with painful clarity, that the meaning of this money had long gone far beyond its actual value. It was the obsession Chris had carried for 8 straight years without ever letting go. It was the lighthouse that never went dark while he walked alone through the dark. It was the dignity he had fought with everything he had to win back with his own 2 hands. More than that, it was proof of one thing he had wanted her to understand, that what stood between them had never been charity and dependence, but a truly equal transaction. In that moment, Chloe finally understood all of it. She understood why Chris had searched for her, why he had brought her home, and why he had been taking care of her like this. This was not pity. It was not sympathy. And it was definitely not charity from above. This was repayment. It was also a solemn handover ceremony that had arrived 4 years late. Chloe slowly handed the phone back to Chris, but both hands immediately came up to cover her face. This time, she did not break down crying again. Her body just kept trembling without stopping. As Chris looked at her, he suddenly felt that the hollow place inside him, the one that had been empty for so long, was finally being filled, little by little. He walked over and sat down beside her. This time, Chris did not keep his distance. He simply reached out and rested a hand lightly on her shaking shoulder. Then he comforted her in a low voice. "Chloe, it's over now." Chloe slowly lowered her hands and lifted her tear-streaked face to look at him. Under the dim yellow light, her eyes were no longer hollow and numb like before. It was as if tiny points of starlight had begun to flicker back to life inside them, slowly rekindling her hope for living. She looked at Chris for a very, very long time. Then, little by little, the corners of her mouth finally lifted into a tiny smile, faint and fragile, yet infinitely precious. It was like the first green shoot forcing its way out of frozen ground after an endless winter. Chris knew that at this exact moment, the transaction between him and Chloe, the one tangled up with money and dignity and stretched across 8 long years, had finally come to a true end. And at that exact moment, another story between them quietly began. The next morning, when Chris woke up, the daylight was already bright outside. It was the first time since moving into this apartment that he had slept until he woke naturally. When he stepped out of the bedroom, he was surprised to find that Chloe was already awake. She was no longer curled up on the couch, like she had been over the past few days. Instead, she stood quietly in front of the huge floor-to-ceiling window, the morning light passing through the glass and sketching a soft golden outline around her. She was still wearing the oversized sportswear he had given her, holding a cup of hot water in both hands while she looked out at the city, slowly waking up beyond the glass. Hearing his footsteps, Chloe turned around. A full night of real sleep seemed to have finally brought a little life back into her. Her eyes were no longer hollow the way they had been before. Instead, they looked like a pool of deep water that had lain still for a very long time. You still could not see the bottom, but at least the surface was no longer dead and stagnant. She spoke softly. "Morning." It was the first time she had greeted Chris on her own. Chris answered just as quietly. "Morning." Then he only nodded, turned, and walked into the kitchen, taking milk and eggs out of the refrigerator. Chloe followed him and stopped at the kitchen doorway, her voice still carrying a trace of hesitation. "Can I use your computer?" Chris answered almost automatically, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Sure. The password is your birthday." The second those words left his mouth, he could clearly feel Chloe's body go still. But Chris did not turn around. He only kept beating the eggs. The truth was, that password had been something he set casually when he first moved in. Even now, he still did not know why he had unconsciously chosen her birthday. Maybe, deep down, this apartment and this life had always remained tied to that transaction that had stretched across 8 long years. By the time Chris brought the fried eggs and the warmed milk to the table, Chloe was already sitting at the computer, quietly looking through something on the screen. Chris did not interrupt her. The two of them simply ate breakfast in silence. It was the first time they had shared a table and a meal, like 2 ordinary roommates. The atmosphere was no longer as tense and suffocating as it had been over the past few days. In its place was a fragile, careful kind of peace. Chloe suddenly asked, "You've been doing pretty well these past few years, haven't you?" Chris paused for the briefest moment, then met her eyes and answered calmly, "Not bad. Work's been busy, but the payoff has been pretty good." Chloe gave a small nod and continued, "I saw that your graduation project ranked first in the whole department." Chris was a little surprised. He had not expected her to have paid attention to something like that. He looked at her and gave a faint smile. "You too. I heard you got an offer from the University of Pennsylvania." The moment that was mentioned, the light in Chloe's eyes dimmed, like a star going out in an instant. She only gave a quiet response, then stopped talking about it. After that, she lowered her head and quickly finished the rest of the milk in her cup. Chris knew he had touched the wound she least wanted opened. She clearly did not want to keep talking either, so she rose from her seat and said softly, "I'll wash the dishes." As soon as she said it, she reached out to clear the table. Chris instinctively pressed a hand over hers. "No, just leave them." But in that instant, his fingertips brushed her skin by accident. Her hand was cold, and so thin he could almost feel the outline of the bones beneath it. Chloe jerked back as if she had been burned. Then she lifted her head and looked at Chris seriously. "Chris, I can't just keep living here for free. I need to find a job." Chris frowned, concern plain in his voice. "Your body still hasn't recovered yet." But Chloe shook her head, leaving no room for retreat. "I'm fine now. I've looked into it. There are plenty of jobs that don't require a high degree or a lot of skill. Waiting tables, working as a cashier at a supermarket, I can do those." Chris did not answer right away. He only looked at her in silence, looked at that face of hers, still weak, yet stubborn all the way through. He knew very well that asking Chloe to work as a waitress would hurt her more than almost anything else, and yet even so, she would still rather do that than keep accepting what she saw as his charity. Chris fell silent for a moment. In the end, he nodded. "All right, but before that, you need to get a new ID card and a new bank card first." Then he pushed the bank card with the 120,000 balance toward her. "The pin is still your birthday." Chloe lowered her eyes to the card, lips pressed tightly together, but she still did not reach out to take it. Looking at the hesitation and resistance written all over her face, Chris softened his voice and added, "This isn't charity. It's what you deserve. It's the return on the investment you made in me back then. You take it and use it to start your life over. That's the final part of our transaction." The word transaction had always been the quiet understanding between them. It gave Chloe a step she could stand on to accept his help, and it also gave Chris a reason to take care of her without feeling like he was crossing a line. At last, Chloe slowly reached out and picked up the bank card. Her fingers were still trembling faintly. That weekend, Chris went with her to the police station to replace her ID card. When it was time to take the photo, Chloe looked visibly nervous. It was probably because she had gone too long without facing a camera, and Chloe no longer even knew how to put on a normal expression. The photographer sounded a little impatient. "Miss, could you smile a bit? Something more natural." She tried to pull at the corners of her mouth, but what came out looked even worse than crying. Seeing that, Chris stepped forward and quietly apologized to the photographer first. Then he crouched down in front of Chloe until they were eye level. "Look at me." Chloe lifted her eyes and looked at him, still carrying that lost, uncertain haze. Chris softened his voice and spoke slowly. "Do you remember the sports meet back in freshman year?" She froze for a moment. Chris kept going in that same calm, gentle tone, describing a picture he had kept in his heart for years. "You were sitting on the main stand that day, wearing the student council uniform and a white sun hat. The sun was strong, and you kept talking to the people beside you. You were smiling so happily." His voice was low and steady, like he was telling an old story that had nothing to do with her. But Chloe's eyes slowly began to change. The blank confusion faded, replaced by a faint shimmer of tears. Chris looked at her and said softly, "Use that smile. Smile like that one more time, okay?" Chloe kept looking at him for a very long time. Then, she gently closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, she turned toward the camera and slowly showed a small, fragile smile. There was sadness in it, and relief, and also a trace of the pride that belonged to Chloe. A pride so deep, even she might not have noticed it herself. Click. The image was captured in that instant. After finishing the ID card paperwork, Chris went with her to the bank. The whole process turned out to be far more complicated than he had imagined. The moment the bank clerk entered Chloe's name into the system, a glaring red warning box popped up on the screen. "Dishonest judgment debtor." The clerk's expression changed instantly, and the way she looked at them gained a trace of caution and contempt. Her tone turned sharply formal. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Under current regulations, we cannot process a new debit card for you. All bank accounts under your name have already been frozen." Chloe's face turned white in an instant. She stood there like someone being sentenced in public, quietly enduring all those subtle but unmistakable looks from the people around them. Chris could feel her body trembling. He stepped forward immediately and placed himself in front of her, blocking those unfriendly eyes from reaching her. Then he faced the clerk and kept his voice as calm and controlled as possible. "Thank you. We understand." With that, Chris took her out of the bank. The sunlight outside was harsh and bright, yet when it fell on Chloe, it seemed to carry no warmth at all. Leaning against the wall, she spoke in a voice filled with bottomless despair. "It's useless, Chris. I'm blacklisted. I don't even qualify to have a bank card anymore. I can't find work. No company is going to hire someone who can't even open a payroll account. There's no place left for me in this world." Then she slowly hugged her knees, sank down little by little, and buried her face deep into her arms. The fragile hope she had only just begun piecing back together over the last few days was shattered again by reality in an instant. Chris looked at the way her back seemed on the verge of collapsing entirely, and the pain in his chest felt like needles driving in one after another. But he also knew that right now, any words of comfort would sound empty. So he took out his phone and made a call. The person on the other end was a senior from college, now a partner at a well-known law firm. The second the call connected, Chris skipped all preamble and went straight to the point. "Hey, senior, it's Chris. I need to ask you something legal. For someone on the dishonest debtor list, what procedures are required to get the name removed?" His voice was not loud with emotion, but it was clear and firm enough that Chloe, crouched nearby, heard every single word. Her shoulders stopped shaking. Then she slowly lifted her head and looked at Chris in disbelief. Chris didn't look at her. He stayed focused on the explanation coming through the phone. Every now and then, he nodded and pressed for the key points. "Right. So the main debt comes from joint guarantee liability after the company's bankruptcy, and the person involved did not transfer or hide any assets. Okay, I understand. So as long as we can reach a settlement with the primary creditors and fulfill part of the repayment obligation, there's a chance we can apply to the court to have her name removed from the list, correct?" "Got it. Thanks, senior. Dinner's on me next time." After ending the call, Chris crouched in front of her so they were eye level. "You heard all that. It's not as hopeless as you think. This isn't a dead end. It's just a legal process, and a complicated one. I'll find you the best lawyers. We'll contact every creditor, negotiate with them, and work out a repayment plan. Your debt, we'll deal with it together. You're not alone in this." Tears rushed out of Chloe's eyes again, but this time, despair was no longer the only thing inside them. Hiring lawyers, sorting through debt, contacting creditors, a long chain of complicated legal procedures was finally set in motion. Chris pulled in almost every connection and resource he had built over the years. The senior from law school also referred him to a team that specialized in debt disputes, and they were both professional and highly efficient. Chloe told the lawyers everything she knew, holding nothing back. The mess left behind by her father's company was even more complicated than Chris had imagined. It involved multiple banks and dozens of private creditors. The total amount was an astronomical figure, enough to crush an ordinary person outright. But just as the lawyers said, as long as the person is still here and still willing to solve the problem, there is always a way forward. So they began reaching out to the largest creditor banks first, exploring the possibility of restructuring and negotiated settlement. It was going to be a long process. There was no way it would be solved overnight, but at the very least, they had finally taken the first real step. Knowing that professionals were now handling the wreckage, the massive stone weighing on Chloe's chest seemed to lift, little by little. Her mental state improved in a way that was visible to the naked eye, and she stopped locking herself in her room all day. When Chris came home from work, he would sometimes find her sitting quietly on the couch, using the tablet to watch online open courses. Economics, management, design, all of them were fields she had once known well and excelled in. She was like a sponge that had been dry for far too long, greedily absorbing water, trying with all her strength to reclaim the time she had lost. One night, Chris was working in the study when Chloe walked in, carrying a cup of hot milk. She gently set it beside his hand and asked softly, "Still working?" Chris kept typing without even looking up and only answered flatly, "Yeah, one of my projects is at a critical stage." Chloe didn't leave. Instead, she stood in front of his bookshelf, quietly studying the things on it. After a moment, she suddenly said, "This place feels too empty." Chris stopped what he was doing and looked up at her. Chloe went on, "Aside from professional books, all you have are these dull decorative pieces." She raised a hand and lightly pointed at an old brass globe sitting on the shelf. "And that too. It feels way too old-fashioned." The tone she used carried that almost natural, unquestioning air of judgment. Chris knew that tone too well. It was Chloe's tone, the tone of a girl who had once lived like a princess. Chris almost wanted to laugh. So he followed her lead and asked, "Is that so? Then, according to your expert opinion, how should it be arranged?" Chloe looked like she had already thought about it and answered almost immediately, "It should at least have some sense of art. There should be a painting here, something in cool tones, a little abstract, That way it could soften all the harsh straight lines in this room and make the space feel gentler. As she spoke, she kept sketching shapes in the air with her hand. There was a sharp, focused confidence shining in her eyes. It was the kind of light that only appeared when she was talking about something she truly loved. In that moment, she was no longer the broken woman who needed saving. She had become Chloe again, bright, exacting, and almost ruthless in her pursuit of beauty. Chris watched her and nodded, then asked casually, "Sounds like you really know what you're talking about." Chloe lifted her chin a little, her tone carrying that familiar, natural confidence. "Of course, I minored in art history in college, and my father used to collect a lot of paintings." Chris listened quietly. When she mentioned her father, the smile at the corner of her mouth faded a little, but the light in her eyes did not go out. He thought for a moment, then said, "All right, then you can take charge of it." Chloe looked caught off guard. "What?" Chris smiled and made it perfectly clear. "I'm officially appointing you as my home art consultant. You'll be in charge of redesigning this place, and you set the budget." Chloe stared at him, still looking like she had not fully processed it yet. Chris picked up a pen from the table and wrote a line on a sticky note. Then he pushed it toward her. "This is your first advance payment." On the note, it said, "Art consultant fee. 1 shrimp rice bowl." Chloe looked at the words and froze for a second. Then something seemed to click in her mind, and before she could stop herself, she let out a sudden laugh. It was the first time she had truly laughed out loud since coming back to this apartment, clear and bright, like wind chimes catching a breeze. She looked up at him, a spark of mischief finally returning to her eyes. "1 bowl isn't nearly enough. My taste back then was worth at least a whole semester of shrimp rice bowls." Chris nodded without hesitation. "Deal." Outside the window, the city lights glittered like an endless river of stars. Chris knew that the real Chloe was finally finding her way back, and their story had finally turned to a new page. This new page was no longer only about debt and repayment. It was about staying beside each other and about finding the courage to live again. Chloe treated the role of home art consultant like a real contract. The very next day, she was already in work mode. Once Chris left for work, she stopped watching online courses and completely took over the high-end computer in his study. She browsed furniture design websites, artists' personal pages, and online galleries with the seriousness of an actual curator. She even downloaded professional design software. Then, little by little, she started building mock-up renderings for Chris's apartment with nothing but a mouse and keyboard. This was obviously a field she had never formally worked in before, yet she learned at an astonishing speed. Her aesthetic instinct felt almost inborn. It had been cultivated over years of growing up in comfort, surrounded by beauty without even realizing it. She knew what beauty was, and she knew how to bring different elements together into something balanced, elegant, and complete. At night, when Chris came home, she would sit there holding her tablet like a serious employee reporting to a boss, showing him the results of her research. She pointed intently at the clear comparison images on the screen and began explaining in detail. "The color of this living room wall is too cold. I'd recommend repainting it in a warm gray, or using textured wallpaper. That would give the room more depth. Your sofa has too many straight lines. It feels too rigid, so you need some curves to soften it. We can replace that square coffee table with something round, or even something with an irregular shape. And the lighting too. Right now you only have one main ceiling light. It's too flat. You should add a floor lamp in the corner and a table lamp beside the sofa, so the atmosphere is built through smaller points of light." Once Chloe got started, she practically could not stop. Her eyes were shining with that steady, professional confidence. Chris rarely interrupted. He just sat there quietly and listened. Watching her like this, he suddenly thought back to those classroom group discussions years ago. To the Chloe who could look at a proposal they had spent sleepless nights putting together and point out the flaw in it with one sharp comment. Back then, what Chris felt toward her was only distance and awe. But now, all he could think was that she looked beautiful like this. When she finished, Chris summed it up with a small smile. "Everything you said makes sense. So when do we start shopping?" Chloe clearly froze for a second, as if she had not expected him to accept her whole plan so easily. After a few seconds of silence, she seemed to come back to herself and asked, "What about the budget?" Chris barely even had to think. "You decide. You're the consultant." Chloe bit her lip lightly and looked down, swiping across the tablet a few times. Then she showed him a number. It was not even enough to cover the coat Chris was wearing. He blurted it out before he could stop himself. "That's way too little." Chloe pushed back immediately, calm but firm. It's not too little. We don't need expensive luxury brands. Beautiful doesn't have to mean expensive. I know a creative market that only opens on weekends. A lot of independent designers and artists sell their work there. We can go take a look first. You can find a lot of interesting things if you know how to dig." As she said it, her eyes were bright with anticipation. It was the first time Chris had seen that particular kind of excitement on her face. The kind people only showed when they were saving money and still managing to find something wonderful. It was completely different from the Chloe he used to know, yet somehow it suited her perfectly. That Saturday, Chris drove her out to the creative market on the edge of the city. It was set inside an abandoned old factory, full of industrial style and artistic energy. Everywhere they looked, there were young faces and all sorts of odd little stalls. The moment Chloe stepped inside, she was like a fish dropped back into water. She pulled Chris from stall to stall, weaving through the crowd. She had an opinion on everything. "Look at this candle holder. It's made of concrete. The shape is so interesting, and it's only 30. This tapestry is hand-woven. The color combination is bold. It would look amazing on the wall." Later, she stopped in front of a stall selling abstract paintings, and her eyes lit up instantly. She could barely hide how much she admired it, and this one too. "The color palette feels very Matisse, but the brushwork is freer. Sir, how much is this piece?" The seller was a young art student, and the price he gave was surprisingly reasonable. Chloe turned to look at Chris. There was a question in her eyes, but even more than that, there was unmistakable longing. Chris nodded. Chloe paid for it right away. Then she carefully rolled up the small painting in her hands. They spent the entire afternoon wandering through the whole market. Chloe bought all kinds of things: vases, candle holders, tapestries, strange little sculptures, and of course that painting. None of the pieces were expensive on their own, but together they made her taste stand out with complete clarity. Chris followed behind her the whole time, carrying bags and paying like the world's most obedient assistant. Sunlight streamed through the factory's enormous windows and fell across her in shifting patches of gold and shadow. She stood there, holding the painting, seriously bargaining with one vendor over $10. When she smiled, the curve of her eyes softened with it. Looking at her profile, Chris suddenly felt that every bit of struggle and effort from the last 8 years had somehow been leading him to this exact moment. To a moment where even after being torn apart by the storm of fate, she could still smile from the heart over something small, pure, and beautiful. On the drive home, Chloe leaned back in the passenger seat with all their little finds in her arms, looking as satisfied as a cat that had just stolen a fish. After a while, she tilted her head slightly and looked at Chris. "Chris, thank you." Chris glanced at her, a little surprised. "For what?" The light in Chloe's eyes shifted softly. "For trusting my taste." Chris only smiled and said nothing more. The moment they got home, Chloe could not wait to start her little redesign project. She climbed onto a stool and hung the abstract painting on the study wall. The cool-toned image instantly cut through the heaviness that had been sitting in the room. Then she placed the concrete candle holder they had bought for $30 on Chris's bedside table. After that, she spread the hand-woven tapestry across the cold wooden floor. Little by little, every corner of the apartment began to carry traces of her. That night, Chris stepped into the study and stood there for a long time, just looking at the painting on the wall. This place, where he had lived alone for so long, cold and untouched, finally, for the first time, began to feel like a home. Things moved a little faster with the legal team than we had originally expected. After several difficult rounds of negotiation, they managed to reach a preliminary settlement with the biggest creditor, a state-owned bank. The bank agreed that as long as Chloe could repay 20% of the principal within the required time frame, they would apply to the court to have her temporarily removed from the dishonest judgment debtor list and restore her most basic civil rights, such as opening a bank account again and using public transportation. That was without question a major breakthrough. But that 20% was still an astronomical figure, enough to crush any ordinary person. The lawyer placed a thick stack of documents on the coffee table in front of us. With a serious expression, she said, "Chris, Chloe, this is the best condition we've been able to secure so far. The bank is giving us 3 months to raise the money. If we miss the deadline, everything we've done up to now will be wasted." Chloe looked at the settlement agreement. Her face slowly went pale again, and the little bit of hope she had just managed to rebuild was pushed back to the edge by the weight of reality. After the lawyers left, the apartment fell into a silence so deep it felt almost dead. A moment later, Chloe finally spoke in a dry voice. "I'll sell the paintings and the collectibles. My father kept some things overseas. If I can find them..." Chris cut her off. his tone calm but firm. It won't be enough. Even if you sell everything, it'll still only be a drop in the bucket. The moment he said it, her shoulders collapsed, and the little strength she had barely gathered was drained away, all at once. Looking at her despair, Chris went into the study, brought back his laptop, opened it, and placed it in front of her. On the screen was a stock trading platform, along with an extremely detailed report of his personal assets, stocks, funds, wealth products, and angel round investments in several startups were all laid out in front of her. Over the years, Chris had thrown almost all of his spare time, beyond work itself, into the capital markets. Just as he had once planned out that $90,000 in college, he had gone on to manage every dollar he earned with the same near-ruthless precision. He was no longer just an engineer who knew how to code. The wealth he had built over the years was far greater than Chloe had ever imagined. Chloe stared at the overwhelming rows of numbers and positions on the screen, too stunned to speak. Slowly, she turned to look at Chris. This? All of this? Chris met her gaze calmly, but there was no hesitation in his voice. It's enough to cover the first settlement payment, with room to spare. Then, he gently closed the laptop and looked straight into her eyes. I told you before, your debt? We'll repay it together. Chloe's voice immediately filled with resistance and unease. But this is your money, Chris. I can't use your money. I already ruined my own life. I can't drag you down with me too. Chris stepped closer, his voice gentle but leaving no room for retreat. This isn't a burden, Chloe. This is a transaction too. Did you forget? I invest in your company, help you handle the debt, and help you get through this. Once your company is back on track, I take 51% of the shares. That's fair, isn't it? Chloe froze. Invest in a company? Shares? She stared at Chris, at the utterly serious look on his face that made it impossible to think he was joking. And then she understood. Once again, Chris was using this method to protect the last fragile piece of her dignity. He was always like this, wrapping the softest, warmest kindness in the coldest, most businesslike logic. Chloe spoke softly, her voice trembling with confusion. But I have nothing left. I don't have a company. I have nothing. Chris looked at her, speaking with the certainty of someone stating an already settled fact. You will. You can register a new company. Call it Chloe Design, or whatever name you like. You'll be the founder and the only artist. I'll be your first investor. Tears slipped down her face again, without warning. This time, Chloe didn't make a sound. She only stared at Chris, in a daze. After a long while, she nodded hard and softly let out a single word. Okay. Just one word, yet it landed with the weight of 1,000 pounds. From that day on, something subtle shifted in the apartment. They were no longer just a landlord and an art consultant. They had truly become business partners. Chloe stopped drowning in the ruins of her past and began working on a business plan for their new company. She studied the market and analyzed competitors, and even started reaching out to a few people she had once known in the art world. That sharp, decisive aura she once carried as a business elite slowly began to return. As for Chris, he took charge of the hardest financial and legal problems. He sold off most of his stock holdings, consolidated the funds, and prepared to inject them into the business they would build together. Their lives started moving with a strange but steady sense of alignment, as if they were finally pulling in the same direction. One night, Chris worked late and got home long after dark. When he opened the door, what greeted him wasn't darkness, but a room full of warm light and the rich smell of home-cooked food. She stopped in his tracks. Chloe was wearing a cartoon apron he had no idea she had managed to dig out from somewhere, and she was carrying a dish out of the kitchen. It was tomato and scrambled eggs, the most ordinary homemade dish imaginable. She looked a little embarrassed as she said quietly, "You've been so busy these last few days, and you haven't really been eating properly. I just made something simple. I don't know if it'll suit your taste." There were 2 dishes and a soup on the table. Besides the tomato and eggs, there was stir-fried broccoli and a bowl of pork rib soup. Chris looked at the dishes on the table, then looked up at her. Something inside him softened all at once. He sat down, picked up his chopsticks, and took a bite of the tomato and scrambled eggs first. The taste was unexpectedly good. Chris didn't hold back his praise at all. "It's delicious." Chloe visibly relaxed, and a small smile finally appeared on her face. But that smile soon carried a trace of sadness. "I learned how to make it when I was studying abroad. Back then, I missed home a lot." It was the first time she had ever brought up her life overseas on her own. Chris kept eating while listening quietly. Chloe spoke in scattered fragments about the first time she walked alone into a supermarket in a foreign country, the first time she cooked for herself, and The first time, she secretly cried because she missed home too much. She spoke calmly. So calmly, it was as if she were telling someone else's story. But Chris could still picture it clearly. A girl raised like a princess, someone who had never needed to touch the burdens of daily life, suddenly facing hardship and loneliness all by herself. That meal was unusually quiet, yet strangely warm. After dinner, Chloe insisted on washing the dishes. Chris didn't argue with her. He only leaned against the kitchen doorway, quietly watching her, rolled up sleeves and the busy line of her back at the sink. Under the light, her profile looked soft and beautiful. And suddenly, Chris felt that the debt, the startup, all of it no longer seemed like the most important thing. The only thing he wanted now was for days like this to last a little longer, and then, longer still. Life began to run like a finely tuned machine, steady and precise, under the effort they were both putting into it. By day, Chris handled his company projects and the debt crisis they were facing together. At night, when he came home, there was always a light on and a hot meal waiting for him. Chloe, meanwhile, threw herself completely into her new venture. She registered the company, built a personal website, and even started posting her thoughts on home aesthetics and some of her design work on art platforms. Her talent was undeniable, and before long she had already drawn in a small group of people who genuinely appreciated what she was doing. She still had not landed a real commercial order yet, but her days were full, focused, and alive. The relationship between them also settled into something unexpectedly comfortable. They were roommates sharing a home, startup partners fighting side by side. Sometimes, Chris would catch himself thinking that they looked almost like a couple who had already been married for years. One weekend, the refrigerator at home was empty, so Chris suggested, "Let's make a supermarket run." Chloe lifted a shopping list and gave it a little wave in front of him. Chris nodded, then grabbed the car keys. It was the first time they had ever gone grocery shopping together like an ordinary couple. The supermarket was crowded, full of noise, warmth, and everyday life. Chloe pushed the cart and compared products on the shelves with surprising seriousness. She would switch to a different brand of yogurt just to save a few cents. And then, in the next breath, toss in a bag of pasta that was not especially practical, just because the packaging looked pretty. Chris followed behind her, watching the way she could be careful and calculating 1 second, and suddenly childlike the next. And all he could think was how vividly alive she looked. Just as they were lining up to check out, a hesitant voice suddenly came from the side. "Chris?" Chris turned and saw a stylishly dressed woman staring at him in surprise. It took him a while to place her, before finally pulling her name out of some dusty corner of memory. She had been their classmate in college. Her name was Fiona. Back then, she had shared a dorm with Chloe. Chris only gave her a polite nod. "Hello." Fiona's eyes quickly moved past Chris and landed on Chloe standing just in front of him. The moment she got a clear look at Chloe's face, the surprise in her expression turned into something sharper. Outright shock, laced with a kind of ugly, barely hidden glee. She deliberately raised her voice and put on a dramatic look of disbelief. "Chloe? Oh my God, it really is you. I thought I was mistaken. What happened to you?" She never finished the sentence, but the way she looked Chloe up and down, full of judgment and contempt, already said everything. Chloe was dressed simply today. Just a white t-shirt and jeans, with no makeup on at all, even though she already looked far healthier than she had when Chris first found her. Standing in front of Fiona, polished makeup, designer clothes, the whole picture of success. She still looked painfully plain, almost worn down by comparison. Chloe's whole body stiffened at once. The color drained completely from her face. Almost instinctively, she tried to shrink back, like she wanted to hide herself from sight. Chris stepped forward and quietly placed himself in front of her, cutting off Fiona's deeply unpleasant stare. His voice was cold and flat. "Long time no see. We've got things to do, so we're leaving." With that, Chris took the shopping cart from Chloe and started to walk away. But Fiona refused to let it go. The gossip and malice in her had been fully stirred awake. "Hey, don't rush off. We're old classmates. Let's chat a little. Chloe, I heard from Leo that your family... So what is this now? Are you with Chris?" Her tone was thick with insinuation and malice, as if she were saying, "Look at that princess who used to be so far above everyone else. Now she still has to rely on the poor boy she once looked down on." Chris stopped, turned around, and looked at Fiona with an icy stare. "Fiona, watch your mouth. Chloe is my partner now, and she's also my family." He said the word family with unmistakable force. Fiona was clearly shaken by the coldness in Chris's eyes and the pressure in his presence. She opened her mouth, but did not dare say another word. Chris ignored her after that. He simply took Chloe's hand and led her out of the supermarket, under the strange, mixed stares of everyone around them. Chloe's hand was freezing cold, and it would not stop trembling. After they got back into the car, she did not say a word. She only turned to look out the window, her shoulders shaking faintly. Chris did not start the engine, and he did not speak either. He knew that ugly encounter had ripped open the fragile wall Chloe had only just begun to rebuild inside herself. It cruelly reminded her that in the eyes of the world, she was still the failed girl who had fallen from the clouds, still the kind of joke people could stare at and whisper about. After a long time, Chloe finally turned to look at him. Her eyes red, her lips parted, and she said softly, "Chris, just now." Chris cut her off immediately. "I told you already. You're my family. I won't let anyone bully you." His voice was calm, but it carried a force that could not be shaken. Chloe just kept looking at him, and suddenly tears began to spill down her face like beads on a broken string. Choking on her sobs, she asked again the same question she had already asked so many times. "Why are you so good to me?" Chris looked at her tear-streaked face and felt something in his chest slam hard against him. 8 years. Ever since that game of truth or dare, there had always been a thin sheet of paper between them. Something called transaction and debt. Chris had spent all these years carefully preserving that distance, because he knew it was his way of protecting her, and protecting himself too. But just now, in that supermarket, the moment the word family left his mouth, he knew that paper had already been pierced through by his own hand. He did not want to keep hiding behind cold business logic anymore. Chris reached out and gently wiped the tears from her face with his fingertips. Then he leaned closer, slowly, carefully. In that car, in that narrow space that belonged only to the two of them, he kissed her. Chloe's whole body stiffened instantly, and her eyes widened in shock. Her lips were cool and tasted faintly of tears, soft beyond belief. The kiss was light and tender, without a trace of lust in it. It was not impulse, and it was not a test, but a declaration, solemn and serious, one that had arrived 8 years too late. Chris slowly lifted his head, resting his forehead gently against hers as he looked into those eyes, filled with confusion and helplessness. Chris held her gaze and said each word clearly, carefully, and with complete seriousness. "From the moment I received that 90,000 8 years ago, you stopped being just my creditor. You became the light I looked up at for 4 whole years, and the only destination I spent 4 whole years fighting to reach." That kiss was like a stone cast into still water, sending ripple after ripple through the chaotic lake of Chloe's heart, none of them willing to fade. Chloe could still feel the warmth left on her lips, along with that clean, woody scent on Chris that always made her feel strangely safe. Even after he slowly pulled away, she remained frozen in the same stiff position, her mind almost completely blank. There was only one stunned thought left in her head. What did he just say? He said she had been the light he looked up to for 4 whole years. He said she had also been the only destination he fought toward for 4 whole years. Those words hit like a chain of gentle but devastating explosions beside Chloe's ear, and they blew apart the fragile mental wall she had only just managed to piece back together from the wreckage of reality. Chloe looked at him in disbelief. You pity me, don't you?" Chris looked back at her and asked quietly, "Pity you? Chloe? Did you forget which one of us was actually more pitiful 8 years ago?" Chloe froze. Chris went on. "Back then, I walked into that KTV wearing an old coat so washed out it had practically turned white. I couldn't even afford my share of one group dinner. In your eyes, I probably didn't even qualify as a proper joke. Did you ever pity me back then?" Chloe shook her head, almost instinctively. "I admit it. Back then I lived high above everything, and I didn't understand hardship at all. The way I looked at you, it was like looking at someone from another dimension. There was curiosity. There was confusion. But there was never pity, and never sympathy. That kind of feeling didn't even belong on the same level." Chris nodded and picked up where she left off. "Right, you didn't. You just gave me a chance in a clumsy way you probably didn't even realize yourself. With that 90,000, you built a bridge for me. You gave me a chance to crawl out of that dark pit I was trapped in, and look toward the other side. From that day on, you were standing at the far end of that bridge, and every day, I ran across it like my life depended on it. I couldn't stop. I didn't dare stop, because every time I looked up, I could see you. You were my direction. I never dared imagine that one day I would actually make it all the way to your side. I only wanted this. When I finally reached the end, I wanted to at least have the right to stand in front of you and look you in the eye, and then return what I owed you with my head held high. It took me 8 years, but I finally made it to the end of that bridge. And when I got there, I realized you were no longer standing on the other side. You had fallen. You had fallen into a pit even deeper than the one I was in back then. So this time, let me be the one to build a bridge for you." Chloe's tears finally broke loose for real. And inside her, emotions crashed and roared like a flood. So that's what it was. That game she had long since forgotten. That money she had never truly taken to heart had carved something this deep into Chris. The tiny stone she had tossed away without thinking had really changed the course of another person's entire life. And now, that same river had turned back toward her, trying to save the version of her that had already dried up. Chloe could not say a single word. All she could do was let the light called Chris fall straight into the chaos of her world. She did not even remember clearly how they made it back home after that. She only remembered that when Chris started the car, he naturally took her cold hand from where it rested on her knee. His palm was large, warm, and steady with strength. The whole drive back, Chris said nothing. He only held her hand with a quiet firmness that did not allow doubt. After they got back to the apartment, he put the groceries into the fridge one by one, just like he always did. Then, he went into the kitchen and started making dinner. Chloe stood in the living room, watching his back as he moved around the kitchen. Tall, steady, safe. That quiet, poor student she had once left far behind had, without her even realizing it, grown into a tree strong enough to shield her from the wind and rain. Chris placed the finished dishes on the table and said softly, "Eat." Chloe sat down and picked up her chopsticks, but for a long time, she could not make herself move. Looking at him, she gathered the greatest courage she had ever had in her life, and finally asked the one question that mattered most. "Chris, what are we now?" Chris looked up. He looked at the nervousness and uncertainty written all over her face, and suddenly smiled. That smile was like winter sunlight, melting the last trace of frost left inside her heart. He did not answer her directly. Instead, he reached out and gently tucked a loose strand of hair by her cheek behind her ear. The movement was so soft, so intimate, that it said more than words ever could. In that moment, Chloe understood everything. The next day was Monday. Chris went to work early, just like always. But Chloe knew something had changed completely. It was the first time she had ever felt a real emptiness after he left the apartment. Slowly, she walked to the doorway of his bedroom and found that the door had been left open. Inside, it was exactly what she would have expected from Chris. Minimal, restrained, everything arranged with perfect order, just like the man himself. His sleepwear from the night before was lying on the bed, still seeming to hold a trace of his warmth and scent. As if under a spell, Chloe walked in, picked it up, hugged it to herself, and buried her face in it. Taking a deep breath, it smelled entirely like Chris. The moment she realized that, her face burned hot. She quickly put the clothes back where they had been, fleeing his room like a guilty thief caught in the act. But inside her chest, her heart was still darting around like a startled deer, refusing to calm down. So this was what it felt like to fall for someone. Sweet, flustered, and completely at a loss, all at once. Chloe spent the entire morning trapped in that mess of feelings, unable to focus on anything. It was only a call from the lawyer that finally pulled her back to reality. She steadied herself and picked up. On the other end came the lawyer's familiar steady voice. "Chloe, the bank has confirmed the settlement agreement. We now need some documentation related to your father's early company assets, especially the overseas portion. It's crucial for the next round of negotiations. Do you remember where those materials would usually be kept?" Chloe searched her memory, then answered slowly. "My father had a very hidden safe. It's not at the company, and it's not at home. It's in the old house our family owns in the suburbs." The lawyer responded immediately. "All right, understood. I'll apply to the court right away for temporary access on the grounds of locating key evidence. You should be prepared. We may need you there in person to identify things." After the call ended, Chloe's heart sank. Go back. She would have to return to the place that held all the best memories of her childhood. And now, that place had long since become a ruin in every way that mattered. Chloe felt a wave of fear, but she still told Chris about it. There was a pause on the line. Then Chris said only one thing. "I'll take leave and go with you." Chloe hesitated and replied softly, "You don't have to. You're already so busy." But Chris left no room for retreat. He simply repeated, firm and steady, "I'm going with you." 2 days later, they stood with the lawyer in front of the familiar wrought iron gate. The official seal had already been broken, and 2 court officers stood nearby with expressionless faces, overseeing the process. Chloe looked at that familiar carved gate, then at the flowers and plants in the yard, now overgrown and neglected from so many months without care, and her eyes turned red almost instantly. She remembered that the swing in the yard had been built by her father with his own hands for her 5th birthday. That patch of lawn had been where her grand 18th birthday celebration was held. Every blade of grass and every branch in this place carried her memories and the glory her family once had. But now everything was different. Her legs felt as heavy as lead, and she could barely take a single step. Then a warm hand closed around hers. It was Chris. He said nothing. He only tightened his grip slightly, and just like that, he led her forward, step by step, into this place that felt both painfully familiar and terrifyingly strange. Inside, a thin layer of dust covered everything. Every piece of furniture was draped in white cloth, making them look like silent ghosts in the dim light. The air carried a stale, suffocating smell. Guided by memory, Chloe led them up to the 2nd floor. At last, she stopped in front of the innermost room of her father's study. It had once been a private collection room. The walls, which had once been lined with famous paintings, now held nothing but pale rectangular traces where the frames used to hang. Chloe walked over to one section of the wall and, following the exact sequence she remembered, entered the code through a row of mechanisms disguised as books. The wall slowly slid aside, revealing a massive built-in safe. Both the lawyer and the court officers looked visibly surprised. Chloe turned the combination dial. Then she slowly pulled open the heavy door. Inside, there were no gold bars or jewels like she had half expected. There were only rows of neatly arranged documents and several velvet boxes. Chloe opened one of the boxes. Inside lay a sapphire necklace, the piece of jewelry her mother had loved most when she was alive. In another box was a men's watch, the very first gift Chloe had ever given her father. Only then did she truly understand that to him, the most precious things had never been those priceless collectibles, but the items that carried the feelings of his family. Chloe's tears finally broke free again. They fell one drop after another onto the velvet box. Chris walked over, then wrapped his arms around her gently from behind. He did not say a word. He only rested his chin lightly on top of her head, using the warmth of his body to comfort her in silence. In that moment, inside this cold room filled with painful memories, Chloe felt a kind of safety she had never known before. Then, the lawyer, who had been quietly waiting nearby, finally spoke. Her voice was steady and clear in the stillness of the room. "Chloe, this is a major discovery. With this, we'll have much stronger leverage in negotiating with the bank. It proves that your father did not maliciously transfer assets. It shows that before the company collapsed, he had already set up a lawful separation of family assets. Legally, that gives us far more room to fight from a position of strength. Without question, this was the first ray of light at the end of the tunnel. They were still far from solving everything, but at least now, they could finally see hope." When they left the old house, Chloe turned back for one last look at the building, lonely and worn beneath the setting sun, and the grief inside her seemed to ease just a little. In that moment, she realized that the best way to say goodbye to the past had never been to forget it, but to carry away what mattered most and keep moving forward. And now, beside her, there was finally someone who could walk forward with her. On the drive back, Chloe leaned silently against Chris's shoulder and did not say a word. Chris did not speak either. He only changed the music in the car to her favorite tune, Castle in the Sky. The gentle melody felt like a soft hand, smoothing out every crease in her heart. It seemed that from that day on, life quietly pressed the fast-forward button. Armed with the newly discovered evidence, the legal team launched a fresh round of negotiations with the bank. And, on Chloe's side, her new career finally welcomed its first real opportunity. A week later, she received a call from an unfamiliar number. The caller introduced himself as the manager of a boutique hotel. He said he had seen the articles and design sketches she had posted online about spatial aesthetics, and that he deeply admired her ideas and wanted to invite her to create the interior styling proposal for a new VIP lounge the hotel was preparing to open. The moment she hung up, Chloe was so excited she nearly jumped on the spot. This was her very first real client. She almost ran straight into the study and threw her arms around Chris, who had been reading documents. Her voice was full of excitement she could not hold back at all. "I got a project, Chris. I really got one." Chris was jolted slightly off balance by the force of her hug, but he recovered quickly, and a genuine smile spread across his face. He held her by the shoulders and looked at her flushed face, eyes full of admiration and pride. Then he pulled her into a firm embrace and said with open relief and certainty, "I knew you could do it." In that moment, Chris's approval meant more to Chloe than any business success ever could. From then on, she threw all of her passion into the project. She pulled several all-nighters, dug through a mountain of research, and sketched out dozens of design drafts. Chris never interfered with any of her decisions. But whenever she stayed up late, he would quietly bring her a cup of hot milk. And whenever she hit a wall and got restless or frustrated, he would take her out for a walk and tell her funny stories from work, just to pull her mind away from the pressure for a while. Half a month later, Chloe took a thick proposal, one that was close to perfect, to meet the hotel manager. The manager was extremely satisfied with her design and signed the contract on the spot. The advance payment was quickly wired into the corporate account for Chloe Design. When Chloe got the bank message and saw that first real income sitting in the account, her eyes nearly filled with tears on the spot. It proved that she, Chloe, was not some burden who could only survive by clinging to someone else. She could stand up again with her own hands and her own talent. Phone in hand, Chloe practically ran out of the apartment and all the way to the base of Chris's office building. She called him, her tone urgent and impossible to refuse. "Come downstairs, right now, immediately." A few minutes later, Chris hurried out of the building. He looked at her with obvious concern. "What happened? Is something wrong?" But Chloe did not answer. Instead, she rose onto her toes and right there in front of all the people passing by, planted a bright, decisive kiss on his lips. Then she held her phone up in front of him, like an eager kid showing off a report card. With a little pride and excitement she could not hide, she said clearly, "Chris, look, I made money." Chris stared at the number on the screen and froze for a few seconds. Then he looked up at her face, glowing with excitement. The next second, he broke into open laughter, the sound full of joy and shameless affection. Still laughing, he reached up and ruffled her hair. "All right, my consultant Chloe, what do you want for dinner tonight?" "My treat." Chloe immediately put her hands on her hips, straightened her back, and answered with absolute determination, "No, I'm treating tonight. Let's go home. I'll make you the deluxe shrimp rice bowl, the $25 version." Chris's smile only deepened. His voice softened as he answered, "All right, let's go home." In the sunset, their shadows stretched long across the ground, and Chloe knew that the future that truly belonged to them, bright, new, and full of hope, had finally arrived.